So let's go to my colleague and friend, Supervisor Don Natoli. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Senator Wolk, and certainly thanks to the U.S. Committee Chairperson and the committee for inviting me, but certainly the Delta counties as their representative here this morning to participate in this hearing. And we want to thank you for your leadership, certainly you and Assemblymember Frazier and others for, I think, the scrutiny is being provided to a proposal that obviously has very far-reaching impacts. And so, again, we're very pleased to be here this morning. I would just note that on behalf of the other 4 Delta counties, certainly including Sacramento, but Contra Costa, San Joaquin, Solano, and Yolo County, that we've worked together, certainly with you, Senator, and folks from throughout the spectrum as it relates to not only the twin tunnel proposal, but water issues generally, and we have appreciated, obviously, the opportunity to do that. And this morning, we come here in the spirit, obviously, of, I think, acknowledging the challenges, and I think previous speakers, certainly speakers have addressed some of those issues, and we're going to hear from other experts as well this morning. And so rightfully, we're focused on the issue that you've brought clarity here to this morning, but also, I think, to talk about, what does the future look like? And I would just suggest that certainly the Delta counties would not only prefer, but suggest that we focus, rather than on twin tunnels, that we look at a better approach to addressing water challenges that face certainly California as a state, but certainly regions of the state, specifically the Delta, as we're talking about this morning. And that we would also suggest that we devote maybe our staffing and financial resources to developing near-term as well as mid to long-term implementable projects that have, we believe, a great potential to result in successful and immediate returns and system-wide improvements. Fixing and enhancing the existing system certainly is something that has been talked about. It's been called out for in our strategy, the county strategy and platform, and know that others have likewise said that, and you alluded to it in some of your earlier questions this morning as it relates to levee improvements, to ecosystem improvements, and I'll speak to some specifics in just a moment. I wanted to also touch on the fact that the issue of governance, and you raised that earlier as well. We certainly from the local perspective have been working with the administration, with the Natural Resources Agency leadership and staff, and with the assistance, obviously, of our legislative delegation to attempt, at least under the previous iteration under the BDCP, to develop a governance structure working in concert, obviously, with the various parties, which would have provided the 5 counties with a real decision-making and participatory role that was a meaningful one. We're very, very concerned that as the project has been now redefined to be the California Water Fix and the Eco Restore, that there really is no longer, it doesn't appear to be anyway, in the Water Fix, any provisions that provide a framework which would include the Delta Counties Coalition, local governance, and participation in that. And we think that missing piece is very, very disconcerting and concerning, and so we'd want to raise that as a real red flag. And one might also ask, what does success then look like for the Delta? In other words, what specific outcomes are needed to ensure sustainable and equitable water and resource management? In our view, success in the Delta is a healthy ecosystem, which supports, obviously, statewide water supply reliability, and those are the co-equal goals in the Reform Act. But we would put strong emphasis as well as supporting a thriving Delta community and communities, but when we say Delta community as a whole. Sacramento County and the Delta Counties Coalition believe those values and resources which are unique to the Delta can be protected and enhanced while still meeting the statewide water supply and ecosystem restoration needs. To accomplish this, as I mentioned a moment ago, we offer some specifics. We've crafted a holistic set of objectives and certainly have circulated those over the last year or two. But they would include the water system operational improvements, such as projects which would facilitate the through Delta conveyance and include improvements to existing state and federal water diversion facilities located in particular in the South Delta, and I know that Ms. Swanson had talked about that a moment ago. We would also advocate that water supply and storage projects, which increase surface and groundwater availability statewide, would be very beneficial. A more robust flood protection element that includes, obviously, levee improvements for a variety of reasons, but certainly to protect the water sources, but also the lands and communities, as we look at Delta as a place that contributes significantly to the agricultural production, but also to the way of life and to all aspects of what we believe is, are very, very important to Northern California, but certainly to California as a whole. We would advocate certainly for regional self-reliance, which would include projects promoting reduced reliance on water from the Delta, as called out for in both the Delta Plan and, of course, in the Delta Reform Act, and I know that you were very much involved in those discussions, Senator Wolk. And lastly, of course, we would advocate and have in restoring the Delta, which has many key features, but this strategy would include obviously preserving and protecting the Delta's economy, its agricultural, recreational, cultural, water quality, levees, fish and wildlife, and the list could go on. And so we understand that and acknowledge that these strategies are not intended to be a fully comprehensive list of all actions necessary to meet the state's co-equal goals. They do, however, represent a much more reasonable, again in our view, approach for beginning the process without making the extraordinary investment needed to implement the water fix, which in its current form, as we're all well aware, continues to focus on a narrow set of Delta issues centered around the twin tunnels. It is also our hope that the forthcoming projects coming out of the initial round of Proposition 1 would be a huge and certainly initial step in helping to achieve the goals of increasing water supply reliability and maintaining the healthy Delta ecosystem without, again, tying them back to the Twin Tunnel project. And, of course, legislative support and funding for projects which would promote regional self-reliance, such as recycled water, water conservation, groundwater cleanup and storage, and et cetera, also are very, very important. And so we would say, too, that the water fix aside, that the Prop 1 dollars could be used to fund many of the projects throughout the state, which would enable us to achieve the goals, and I think actually put some proof to the fact that in looking at having better assurances for water supply, and certainly in making for more reliable sources of water for all regions of the state, that we would be better served by making those investments. We also would note that the DCC, the Delta Counties Coalition, promotes many things that are consistent with several of the priorities that are included in the Governor's Water Action Plan. And without going into that in great detail, I would just make sure that it's very, very clear, crystal clear, that in those elements, there's a key one that we don't embrace, and that is the concept, obviously, of the isolated water conveyance linked to the water fix. And I would say, too, that though some project impacts have been lessened in the most recent iteration, I was a little bit concerned when you said 150 miles below the Delta, but because I thought, well, that's going to really be a project, a major undertaking. But that the long-term, in all seriousness, the long-term negative and lasting impacts of twin tunnels remain, and very little's changed in that regard. Would note, too, that we've been on record for a number of years and certainly have supported and advocated a through Delta approach to the movement of water. We maintain that the state and federal governments should fully analyze and evaluate the through Delta conveyance and other alternatives, and certainly we'll hear from others this morning about those. And we recommend that through Delta improvements as a viable alternative in meeting the co-equal goals. The development of local water supply alternatives in the areas served by the state and federal water projects, including but not limited to, again, a bit redundant here, but water use efficiency improvements, conservation, water recycling, desalination, groundwater remediation, low-impact development, and conjunctive use must be included as alternatives in the water fix evaluations, including the current EIR, EIS, and we believe that's in keeping with state policy to reduce reliance on the Delta. And I would say lastly, the counties further maintain that improving Delta levees is a critical and essential component of increasing the reliability of water supplies in the near and the long term. And I appreciated your question earlier about how that is addressed if in fact the Twin Tunnel project were to move forward. So in closing, I would just sum it up to say that believe we've demonstrated a commitment in partnering to develop solutions which would help minimize or reduce the impacts of the water fix BDCP on the interests of the people who live and work in the Delta, as well as people throughout the state who depend on the Delta for water. As certainly this committee knows, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is a place of beauty, of wonder, of bounty, a place like none other in the world. And if we stop pursuing this course that is being pursued with regard to twin tunnels, which in my view would lead to the further degradation and weakening of the way of life and certainly the economy and all that goes with the historical and cultural aspects of the Delta. And if we really do refocus on real solutions, which would bolster our water supply, restore the environment, and protect the future of the Delta, that we would all be better served. And so we would just note that we don't believe it's necessary to sacrifice the Delta region in order to solve the water challenges facing the state of California. And finally, I would just say that to answer your question that you started this committee hearing with, are the twin tunnels the answer to the problem, or are they good for California? I would just simply answer, they're not good for the Delta, and they're not good for California. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Supervisor. When in the Delta Reform Act, the co-equal goals were certainly enshrined there, the reliable water supply for California and protecting and enhancing the Delta ecosystem. But also with that was that they should be achieved in a manner that protects and enhances the unique cultural, recreational, natural resource, and agricultural values of the Delta as an evolving place. And one of the concerns that I've had is that once there is no BDCP, what does that mean for the co-equal goals, and what does that mean for the very important third leg of the stool, which is essential, namely the Delta. So thank you for that, and for your constructive, the Delta counties have been extremely constructive in their suggestions and approach, and I appreciate that. All right, let's move on to Craig Wilson, former Delta Water Master, former everything. So,
former everything.
Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Wolk. And I wanted to thank the Senator and other members of the committee for having the foresight and courage to have a committee hearing on this very important topic. And what I want to do today is just talk a little bit about the role that the Delta plays in the major water distribution system, moving water from the north to the south. And in my role and honor of serving as the state's first Delta Water Master for 4 years, I talked to a lot of people about this issue. I traveled up and down the Delta, talked to the Delta interests, but also spent a lot of time talking with the people that run the state water projects and move water from the north to the south, served on the real-time drought operations teams, and saw the managers, engaged in some pretty heroic efforts to deal with the drought. So I want to try to bring that perspective to my comments today. And as the Senator indicated, I'm now retired. I think this is the first time I've worn a coat and tie in about 8 months. And, so I'm not being paid to say anything today. These are my thoughts and ideas about the issues in the Delta. So I want to cover 3 basic things. First, talk about the problems with the present conveyance system to move water from the north to the south, and how the Delta is affected. I know Dr. Swanson spent some time on that, so I'll cover it very briefly. Second, I want to give some thoughts on the tunnels projects, some of the pros and the cons to those proposals. And lastly, I want to present what I feel is a viable alternative to the tunnels that has not been adequately studied either by BDCP or California Fix, and I call this a Western Delta conveyance system. So the first topic, the present conveyance system, I think most people realize it's really the worst of both worlds. It isn't very efficient in moving water from the north to the south, and it's been very destructive to the Delta ecosystem and the Delta community. Why is that? Under the natural flow regime with the tidal estuary, you have flow basically going west to east, east to west in tidal cycles. And with the present project, with the massive pumps to the south, that hydrodynamic regime has been largely changed, and in many portions of the year, it's now a north-south type pattern, which has had a devastating effect on fisheries. The present system is inefficient in a sense that large amounts of water have to be set up kind of as a hydraulic barrier to make sure that there's adequate quality at the export pumps, so that it's not a very efficient way of moving water. So you've got those two aspects. And it's also, not very reliable, both from a physical sense and a regulatory sense. In a physical sense, it is subject to potential, catastrophic problems if there's levee failures and the Delta becomes, salty as a result of some type of domino effect with levee destruction. And also, because of the problems caused to the fisheries, you have regulatory constraints on the present system to protect the endangered species. And so the combination of those things just makes it very clear that the present conveyance system is not adequate. And the legislature recognized that in 2009 in the water reform legislation. It's indicated very clearly that we need to re-examine this issue and kind of made a pathway toward making, a decision and trying to get on with some proposals to fix the conveyance system. Now, the preferred alternative coming out of, what used to be BDCP and now called the California Water Fix is the tunnels. I won't go into the details of the, it's been already articulated, other than to say that, I agree with Senator Frazier. I think the $15 billion price tag is grossly, understated when you think about just the amount of material that would have to be removed, as the tunnels are excavated and put somewhere. I think you're talking about, very high price. But anyway, some of the pros and cons, there are some pros to the tunnels project, and I will go through those, but one of the main points to make about that is that most of the benefits and pros to the tunnels accrue to the exporters to the south and don't accrue to other parts of the state, the Delta and others. And some of these pros are, there's no question that by building an isolated facility to the north and the ability to send good quality Sacramento River water directly to the export pumps, there will be better water quality for the exporters, not for the Delta, because as you take that water out of the system, it means the Delta has less water in it. So you've got that issue. The reliability, again, it's reliability for the export water by having this isolated facility, but there's no reliability for the Delta, for either the fisheries protection or the agricultural community. And in fact, if there is some type of levee failure or catastrophic event, there probably would be less incentive on the part of a lot of people to try to jump in and fix that immediately, since there's this isolated facility that protects the export water. And finally, the Delta project, the tunnels project does have some benefit in the sense that it would partially restore a more east to west flow, but not totally, because as Dr. Swanson indicated, you still would be operating the export pumps at times, so you would have potentially a better situation, but potentially not, because you'd have water taken out north of the Delta, then you'd still have the pumps operating at times at the south, so you would have potential of less flow and also still have some change in the hydrodynamics, both of which could affect the Delta agriculture and the Delta fisheries.
I think the fish will get confused.
They've been confused for a long time. So some of the cons to the tunnels project, I think I alluded to one of them, that a lot of the aspects that are protective of the export water through the application of the tunnels project will not accrue to the benefit of either the Delta or the other areas of the state. The reliability factor isn't there. The better quality factor isn't there. And you've got issues related to the disruptive nature, of building the tunnels project with the right-of-ways and the building of several large diversion works. I think there was an article that came out of the Associated Press yesterday afternoon that there will be something like up to 300 farms that will be perhaps taken by eminent domain through that. And as you'll see later from the proposal I will present, as an alternative, you wouldn't have that issue. So given, that many of the benefits of the tunnels projects accrue only to the export water, and that there are some potential destructive aspects still available, I ask myself, is there a project available that has many of the benefits and pros of the tunnels and avoids some of the negative aspects? And I believe there is, and that's where I get to what I call the Western Delta diversion system. And I think that has a potential to provide better reliability, good quality water for the export, and reestablish what to me just seems a common sense situation. Let the water flow through the Delta as it should naturally, and then pick up that water on the western side of the Delta. The tunnels or canals that would be built there would be much shorter in length, be less expensive. Three aspects of the system I'm about to present. The first is the fact that there would be a diversion works and on the western side of the Delta, probably located on an island called Sherman Island, which is right above the confluence of the Sacramento and San Joaquin River. Sherman Island's owned by the state, so you have a lot of savings and less disruptive the fact that a lot of the diversion works and the beginning of the project to divert it to the south would be on public lands. You wouldn't have the eminent domain issue and taking, land away from private citizens against their will. The conveyance, the actual way that the tunnels would be constructed on a Western system, it's much less in length, less excavation, and at least from what I can see, could be built along public right-of-way, so you wouldn't have this eminent domain issue. But perhaps, the biggest benefit of having this western diversion point is just to reestablish this natural flow from east to west. And the water would, flowing through the delta, you get two uses for the price of one. It goes to the delta, protects the delta for both the fish and the agricultural community, and then that same water can be used to be exported to the south. So that's the first aspect of this alternative that I'm presenting. The second aspect, and it addresses the reliability question, is to consider building an operable gate system somewhere below the confluence of the Sacramento and San Joaquin River, perhaps at an island called Chips Island, which is where the river gets very narrow, and build a system very much unlike what a lot of people just kind of poo-poo when they talk about a gate system. They say, well, you throw a rock barrier across the delta, it's going to destroy navigation, destroy fish, it'll totally change everything. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an operable gate that would act much like a flapper on the bottom of a pinball machine. It would be open 99% of the time. But if there was a problem, if there was a levee issue, the delta got too salty, you could close these gates in a matter of an hour or so and protect the reliability of the diversion point and the entire delta. It would be reliability for both the export water and the delta itself. This operable gate system is not a pie-in-the-sky idea. There have been similar type projects built in Europe for flood protection, larger in scale than what would be built at Chips Island. It's definitely doable, and it would provide, again, that insurance policy not only for the export water, but also for the delta itself. And the third aspect of the alternative I'm proposing is a type of treatment polishing facility. I think one concern that people would have with a western diversion is that sometimes the water, may be too salty, for suitable use to the south. Most of the time, it is of adequate quality. It's below, it's above the confluence of the two rivers, and at least the Sacramento side is pretty good quality, even in the western delta at Sherman Island. But you could build a polishing type facility to treat this slightly too salty water. You're not talking about seawater there. At the most, you may be talking about water that has 2,000 parts per million salt, as opposed to seawater, which has 35,000 parts per million. And there is technology available to polish the quality. You could use some type of sand filtration system. There's a lot of emerging technology about the use of conductive electrodes to separate salt from water. And you could even build a reverse osmosis plant that would be, I call it RO light, in the sense it would not have to be nearly as energy intensive, and it could be constructed in a way where there would be no brine discharge whatsoever to the environment. So there are alternatives. So you put these three aspects together, and I think you've got all the pros of the tunnel project with almost none of the negatives. You would restore the east-west flow system, take the water after that takes place. You would have the reliability aspect with the operable gates, and you'd assure adequate quality through a polishing type facility. And I know there's other people that have studied this. I know in the audience today is the CEO of an outfit called Sol Agra, who has developed a pretty thoughtful and detailed plan that's a little bit different than what I'm proposing. Does have some issues that I have concerns with, but also has some very interesting things that might potentially increase the amount of water that could be both exported to the south and allowed to flow out the bay for protection of fisheries. So that, is basically concludes the remarks I was going to make, and basically saying that, I think there is a system that's viable. I don't think BDCP ever studied a western diversion system that has the three elements that I suggest, both the diversion point in the west, a gate system to protect reliability, and a polishing facility to assure adequate quality. So I think there is a proposal that's there, and with that, I'll close and answer any questions you might have.